Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fantasy Football 201. So the goal of this is going to be to get your start sit advice for Week 9 right before things are happening. We're going to lead this all the way up to game time. So if you have any last-minute decisions, the way this is going to work is that if you ask a question, that will be top priority. But I do have an agenda today as well for those of you that are going to be tuning in and don't have questions but just want to listen to some start sit advice in general. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the agenda, but just as I said earlier, if you have any questions pertaining to this week that you need answered, just let me know, ask it in this chat, and then I'll answer that as soon as I can. So that'll be the priority, but we'll go through all the fan questions first, and then we're going to go through 40% or under the roster players that you can pick up last minute who could be of good value for you both for this week and moving forward. And then we will also look at players that are start and sit candidates for each game. So, and as I said, ask any questions below in this chat, and I will get to that right away. So the goal is this is if we get enough people, we'll have this be a forum where you just ask the questions, and I'll kind of answer it as it goes along. But we will start with the fan questions from the beginning of the week, and then go through that as kind of the initial agenda for this, and then we'll move forward from there. So I got my Nuggets shirt on. We are really bad this year. Just so disappointing, man. But I hope we could turn it around, kind of getting off track a little bit to NBA stuff. But, man, Denver is looking pretty brutal right now. All right, so first question is from Dylan O'Shea. He's trying to trade away Sam Laporta, which I recommended as good advice because he had a great game last week, but we'll see what happens when Jameson Williams has now got more stuff going on that leads to some concern about what his long-term value is going to be. But this Detroit offense is very much hit or miss in terms of which players are going to get the volume each week. They're very committed to running the ball, so you're going to have both Montgomery and Gibbs are going to get the majority of the carries. And then Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown, you've seen a little bit of a yo-yo effect where some of them have good games and bad games. So my advice is if you have Laporta is to try to trade him away to get somebody that will give you consistent volume. I'm talking guys like David Njoku, like Evan Ingram, maybe even Cade Otton if you're getting another piece back as well, because those are all guys that I think are going to get some great value moving forward. So I would recommend trying to trade Laporta. Would you recommend trying to trade away T. Higgins? My wide receivers are Puka, Brian Thomas, Sutton, Myers, and Tillman. So I think T. Higgins is kind of in the same boat where he's not consistently reliable because he's always injured. He's not going to play this week. I'll get to that in a little bit. But I think that if you could trade him, I would recommend trying to get some more consistency. But he's, and this kind of applies to Laporta as well, you want to make sure you're getting equal volume back. So I think there's a good situation where you can have both of them be traded, but make sure you're getting some good return as well. And then who are your keepers between the guys that you have on your roster? So number one to me is still Puka Nacua, then Brian Thomas Jr. Then after that, I would probably go with Josh Jacobs, then Travis Etienne. And then Tracy is really making things interesting as a keeper candidate as well. But it's really between him, Laporta, and Higgins. And it's going to I'm going to be interested to see how this develops in the Giants backfield with Tracy moving forward, but he's really looking promising. I would keep your options open on that last spot still, but I think those top four are pretty much locked in. And then when you start Darnold or Bo Nix, personally, I would go with Bo Nix because I think that he's going to get a lot of playing time this week. And I think he's going to get a lot of pass opportunities this week because they're going to be down. Baltimore is not as intimidating as a defense as they've been in years past. So I think this sets up well for Bo Nix to be a good player that you can stay in the flames with. And he would be a great start for this week. All right, so a question from London Jaguars fan, not who to drop to grab Elijah Moore. Either drop Madison, Eckler, Pearsall, or Parker Washington. Leaning Madison with Zamir White getting more work. So I guess my question is do you need Elijah Moore to start for this week? Because I think that he could be a good streaming option, but I would not want to drop Alexander Madison because I think that he's somebody that is going to get a lot of volume moving forward on this team. They really don't have, unless they trade for a running back, it's going to be Alexander Madison. He's been the most consistently involved running back. I think he's somebody that you could stash on your bench or you could put in a pinch. Honestly, for this week, I think you probably, I mean, Moore is a dart throw because to me, he's the third wide receiver on that team. It's Tillman, then it's Judy, and then it's Moore. But then you also have David Njoku mixed in as well. And yes, I understand you have Jameis Winston there too. But to me, Elijah Moore is somebody that is, you could find that on the waivers. You can't find an Alexander Madison. If you do want to pick him up to see what happens, the one that I would recommend dropping among that group is honestly Austin Eckler, because I think that in Washington, you're seeing a 3 running back committee in a sense where, well, Brian Robinson is clearly the number 1 on that team, but Eckler has been effective at times, but we've also seen Nichols be effective too. So looking like Robinson is going to play this week, I would probably drop Eckler between those running backs. But Pearsall and Washington are both interesting to me. To be honest, I'm not really sure if you need Elijah Moore, but if you do want to pick him up, I would drop Eckler. Hope that answers your question. Thanks for the question, though. That is a good one to consider because Cleveland will be interesting to monitor moving forward to see what happens with this receiving core. But ultimately, the ones that I like that'll get the most targets on that team are going to be Njoku and Tillman. All right, this next question is from Jason DePaula. And actually very similar. Drop one of Christian Watson, Moore, and Jalen Warren. I don't need them right now, so it's more rest of season. So if you're looking rest of season, then I would drop Elijah Moore among that group because I think there is a world where Christian Watson is going to get more involvement and Jalen Warren is going to get more involvement in that Pittsburgh backfield. So to me, what I would do is I would drop Elijah Moore among that group. Just got notification Robinson Jr. is out today. Thank you. I did not see that. So in that case, London Jaguars fan, do not drop Eckler. So honestly, what I would do is if you need a receiver to play this week, I would play Parker Washington. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But if Brian Thomas is not going to play, then Washington is going to be a very interesting streaming option against the Philadelphia Eagles. So thank you, Jacob. So for London Jaguars fan, hold on to Eckler. If you really want to drop someone, I would drop, in that case, Pearsall if you want to give Elijah Moore a shot. But I think Parker Washington, to me, is a better streaming option, especially if Thomas Jr. does not play. All right, so that's a good segue now into our under 40% rostered players that could be good starting options and stashing options for this week. So I'll start with the quarterbacks. And this is going to be based off of ESPN stats. So ESPN roster percentages is what I'm basing this off of. Quarterbacks that you want to stash that are under 40% rostered. This player is only 7.2% rostered. He was just named the starting quarterback of the Colts, and that is Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco has already been an effective player. It's amazing to me that he's only 7.2% rostered. You know what you're getting with him. You know you're going to be able to stretch the field. They've got some good receivers on this team like Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, and then they have good dart throws like Adonai Mitchell and Alec Pierce that could be thrown in there as well. So because of that, Joe Flacco should be set up for success rest of season. My issue is that I'm not sure how it's going to go against Minnesota. Minnesota does have a good pass defense, but I think there are better options than Joe Flacco. But that being said, if you're in a 2-quarterback league and Joe Flacco is out there, he is a must-rostered player. Start. So among the players that are less than 40% rostered at the quarterback position, I would be starting Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford is only 29.4% rostered. He gets both his receivers back, and then he puts up 24 fantasy points in 4-point quarterback leagues immediately when Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp come back in the lineup. And I know Nacua is questionable, but Seattle's defense has kind of been slowing down as of late. They've not been as effective. Buffalo, for the most part, had their way with them pretty easily. And I think that Matt Stafford, against the team that he's been familiar with for the past couple seasons, he's going to eat them up today. So I think that among the players that are out there that are likely available at only 29.4% rostered, Matt Stafford is a great pickup for this week. And then another shout out as well for deep quarterback leagues that may be out there as well that could be a great starting option this week as well as Derek Carr. Derek Carr is only 14.6% rostered in ESPN leagues. He is getting the 28th best matchup this week against Carolina. So this is a great setup for Derek Carr to be effective this week. He's been out a couple weeks, and the reason I don't like him over Stafford is because they're missing a lot of weapons on their offense. Like Rashid Shaheed is now gone for the season. They've got some offensive line injuries. But I do think against Carolina that Derek Carr can be very effective as well. I just like the weapons more for the Rams, so that's why I would go Stafford over Derek Carr. All right, now let's go to the running backs. And for those of you, if you do have any questions that you want to ask, let me just drop it in the comment section, and I will get to that as we go through this. But next, what we're going to do is we're going to go through running backs that are less than 40% rostered. Who would be the ones that I would stash and start for this week? And some honorable mentions too. So stash candidates for the running backs. Look at Jaleel McLaughlin is only 23.7% rostered right now. He got 8 carries last week for Denver. He's getting more involved, and the backfield is starting to look like a committee between him and Javonte Williams. This is a very tough matchup against Baltimore, so I'm not expecting big things from him or Javonte Williams. I think both of them are sits for this week. But Jaleel McLaughlin at only 23.7%, this is somebody that you must roster if he's out there. Because if anything happens to Javonte Williams, he gets injured, then McLaughlin becomes an immediate every week starter. So this is something that you really want to make sure if you have an extra spot that's out there. He's a great player to take a flyer on, only 23.7% available. My start for this week among the running backs that are less than 40% rostered, and this one is pretty gross. So you really have to be devoid of a lot of options to go to this player. He's only 8.9% rostered, but he caught 7 receptions last week with a new quarterback. In case you know who I'm talking about, this is Miles Sanders of the Carolina Panthers. Yes, Miles Sanders. And he has not been a good fantasy player since he's been in Carolina, but he had been dealing with injuries at the beginning of the season, so that's something to consider. And then when they switched back to Bryce Young, he outpaced Chuba Hubbard significantly in pass catches. Chuba Hubbard had 2 catches. Miles Sanders had 7 with Bryce Young. So Bryce Young's deficiencies as a passer has been well documented. He's really only able to get the ball about 15 yards down the field consistently. So this is going to be relying upon what we've seen with the short sample size of Miles Sanders and Bryce Young. But really, if you're in a position where you have to start running backs that are lightly rostered like this, you're probably in a pretty tough situation anyway. And I would go Miles Sanders. So a question, kind of going back to some earlier questions about what you would do with some players. Zamir White, if he was out there, I would definitely go with Miles Sanders over Zamir White for this week. Would lean Alexander Madison. Austin Eckler as well as somebody that you definitely want to take over Miles Sanders if he is there. But if you've got some options on your bench, like you've got a Justice Hill or a handcuff running back like a Roshan Johnson that you're hoping gets some more opportunities, I would go with Miles Sanders for this week because I think there's a real potential that he's going to, especially in PPR formats, get receptions to his way that he gives you a decent floor that you can start for this week. So Miles Sanders is only 8.9% available in ESPN leagues right now. So if you need a running back, if you've got some bye week stuff going on, this is a great opportunity to pick him up, and I think he's playable this week. I'm not expecting a great game, but I'm expecting it to be a safe, consistent play that you can rely upon. And they get the New Orleans Saints, which is a pretty favorable matchup too. Okay, we've got a question from Marshall. Looking at Hurts' playoff schedule, I could trade him and Brown stack for Lamb and Brian Thomas. So you're trading Hurts and Brown. Is that just to double check? That's what you're saying. Is you're trading both Hurts and Brown? Let me know in the comments below. So, and then you would get Lamb and Brian Thomas, who I think is more valuable than Hurts. Okay. So, thanks, Marshall. So, and Mayfield, I'm assuming that Mayfield is already on your roster, or you're going to be trading for him. But this is a great trade, in my opinion, because quarterback play is pretty consistent across the board among guys that are both rostered and guys that are on waivers. We've seen a lot of names brought up this season of guys that you can throw in as streaming options. And I think if you could get Lamb, who is arguably the best wide receiver in football, and Brian Thomas Jr., who with all the other injuries on the Jags is going to be set up for success when he gets fully healthy, I would be accepting this trade right away, man. I think this is a good deal for you. I know it sucks to lose Hurts. He's playing really well right now, and A.J. Brown, I think, is going to be good too. But if you have a great QB option that you can pivot to, and then you're also getting two receivers that are arguably both top 15 receivers rest of the season. If you Brian Thomas Jr., you could probably argue could be top 10. I think this is a great deal for you. Who is your other quarterback on your roster right now, though? I think I'm just curious if what your opinions are about like getting Mayfield, like who you'd have to give up for him. But that's a great deal for you, and no problem. Happy to help you with that, man. All right, so let's see, where are we at? Running backs that are under 40% roster that are good. Let's see. Guy who has Mayfield has Daniels. Yeah, that's good. If you could, he's going to obviously want to have Jaden Daniels. So if you can get Mayfield for some bench piece that you don't really need, I would be all over that. That's an example of great fantasy football trading right there. All right. Who are some other running backs to look at this week that are lightly rostered? So if Travis Etienne is out, I would really be looking at a stashing Dearness Johnson. I know that he did not have a good game last week, but he is their pass-catching running back, and Tank Bigsby has some problems as well. And I think that with all the injuries on the Jags, there's a possibility that Dearness Johnson starts getting some more targets. Evan Ingram, we know, is going to get a lot of involvement. Parker Washington, who we talked about a little bit, and we're going to talk about him a little more, and Brian Thomas Jr. But in terms of those backfield touches, if Etienne is going to be out, Dearness Johnson is somebody to stash and then hopefully flip. So I think there's a possibility he has a good game today against the Eagles, but I don't think it's good enough that you want to risk putting it into your starting lineup. And then another player to consider as well, Travion Williams of the Cincinnati Bengals is only 1.9% roster. This is very much a DFS dart throw. I would not be starting him in typical fantasy football league formats, but I would just monitor the situation because Zach Moss is injured and not playing. And Cincinnati, although ideally they're going to give the majority of the touches to Chase Brown, we've seen kind of a two running back committee approach. So we could see some situations where Travion Williams gets some involvement. And I could see Cincinnati blowing out the Raiders and Williams getting a late game touchdown. So this is a guy to just keep an eye out on, that he could have a good game this week. I would not be starting him, but this is, again, another player that you want to monitor because there's a good chance that he has some opportunities moving forward, especially if anything happens to Chase Brown. All right, wide receivers to look at for this week. And I will get to that in just a sec. We'll get to your question real quick, Jacob. For my flex, I am deciding between Myers, Deontay Johnson, and Leggett. I'm leaning Myers. Yeah, I would go with Jacoby Myers. Safest play, Cincinnati is a pretty poor pass defense. Deontay Johnson, I think, is pretty much a sit in all situations. And then Xavier Leggett, although I do like his long-term value as a stash, I think this could be a tough week for him until Bryce Young develops a little more rapport. Then we get Adam Thielen coming back potentially today as well. I think the least amount of variables is Jacoby Myers. He is the wide receiver one, and I think that against Cincinnati, he's going to get a lot of opportunity. I would go Myers this week. Wide receivers that you want to stash. So I just mentioned Xavier Leggett. He's somebody that you want to make sure that you stash him because this team, they just traded Deontay Johnson away. Leggett is stepping into a void that needs to be filled, where he needs to fill this team needs somebody to fill the number one wide receiver role. And no problem, Jacob. I agree with you 100% there. Yeah, so Xavier Leggett, Panthers team needs a receiver to fill that number one void among the wide receivers. And Leggett is the best candidate to do that. And he gives you the most upside. 2nd-round pick, shown some flashes of potential this season. He's very raw. So there's going to be some up and down performances. But got a touchdown last week. He got 7 targets in the absence of Johnson. So this is somebody that you want to make sure is stashed on your bench. I don't really like him as a start for this week, but I think this guy has a lot of potential to be a late season sleeper. And he's only 31.7% rostered in ESPN leagues. So Xavier Leggett is somebody that he's out there. I want to make sure that he's stashed on my bench. Who would you start among the wide receivers for this week that are under 40% rostered? And my start for this week is Quentin Johnson. Quentin Johnson is coming off an injury, but he gets a nice matchup against Cleveland, which is actually a pretty porous pass defense. So he's had some good games this season. He is a little bit big play dependent, but this Chargers team has started to expand their passing offense. Ladd McConkey was a big benefactor of that last week. And I think Cleveland, which is a little better of a run defense than a pass defense, I think there's a situation where Johnson is going to be an effective play this week. I like him to get at least 5 targets. Hopefully he can haul one of them in for a touchdown against the defense that has given up some big plays this season. I think that Quentin Johnson, who's only 20.5% rostered right now, dropped in a lot of places because of his injuries. I think that he is a great start for this week if he is out there. All right. So, and then we will move over to tight ends that are under 40% rostered. So one that I would be trying to stash, this player is only 0.3% available despite scoring 18 points in full PPR formats last week. He caught a one-handed touchdown. Adam Troutman. Adam Troutman being only 0.3% is crazy to me considering how good he played and how badly this team needs a second receiver. But he gets Baltimore this week, which is the 28th best matchup against tight ends. As I said, he had 18 receptions or 18 points last week, not receptions. If he had 18 receptions, this guy would not be 0.3% rostered. But this is a great potential play in DFS. I wouldn't really like him to start for this week. I'm very curious to see how this pass breaks down works for Denver when they're playing an actual good team like Baltimore. But Adam Troutman is somebody that I would be trying to make sure that I stash and see what happens, because next week we've got some big heavy hitters on bye. We've got Brock Bowers and David Njoku on a week 10 bye. So if you want to beat the waivers and get somebody that to cover your Brock Bowers replacement or David Njoku, really take a look at Adam Troutman as stash for this week, because I think that this is somebody that you can hold on to. And if he has another good game, then you've already beaten the waiver process and you've got somebody that you can put in for week 10. And then my start among under 40% rostered tight ends is Mike Gesicki. He had another great game last week, but he's only 10.5% rostered, and T. Higgins is not playing. And we've seen this Bengals team, when T. Higgins does not play, they really rely on Gesicki a lot. And against Kansas City in week 2, Gesicki had 9 targets. Last week, he had 8 targets, and he had 7 for 37 in terms of his passing receptions and yardage. So again, against the Raiders, which, I mean, the numbers tell you that against tight ends, they're middle of the pack. But I'm telling you that if T. Higgins is not there, they're going to be relying on Gesicki, and this Raiders team is not a good defense. I think that Gesicki is a great play for this week, who's only 10.5% available. I would be taking a look and seeing if he is out there to play for this week. And then an honorable mention at the tight end position that I want to bring up as well is Brenton Strange. And this is not a start candidate that I like for this week, but he's only 3.1% rostered. And he had 10 PPR points last week. So, there's a world that if Brian Thomas doesn't play, if ETN doesn't play, that maybe they use 2 tight ends. They're going to need to pass against Philadelphia, and maybe they could get both tight ends involved. I don't love it, but it's something to monitor moving forward to see what happens. And then my flex position, which typically the flex positions have been receivers, because the lightly rostered receivers are usually the ones that can have a great week. That could be a great start depending on matchups among the streaming options. This one is a stash for this week who's only 1.9% rostered, and it's Troy Franklin of the Denver Broncos. I don't love the idea of starting someone who only had one reception last week. But 2 weeks ago in week 7, he was the leading receiver for the New Orleans Saints. He led them, I believe he had 6 receptions in that game. He was pretty effective for them, but then he kind of had a down week last week. I'm predicting that Troy Franklin will have a better performance this week. So I think there is a world where you can actually start him depending on what your other options are. But I think if you can, I would be trying to stash him more so than to play him. If you're looking at, like, let's just take a hypothetical and look at Xavier Legette versus Troy Franklin. I would rather play Xavier Legette among those two players. But Troy Franklin, I could see him getting more involved because this Broncos team is going to need to pass more. And there's a world where he could have a good game. So I'd stash him because I think there's a chance that he becomes a waiver wire target that we're looking at for week 10. And then a start. And this is with a caveat. But if Brian Thomas Jr. does not play, then I would be starting Parker Washington because I think that he immediately becomes their number one receiver. Gabe Davis is not playing. Christian Kirk is out for the season. And I think that Washington is going to get involved. This Jags team is going to be behind in this game. I'm suspecting this is going to be a pretty high-scoring game as well. So I think that this is a player that you can put into your lineup if Brian Thomas is out. This is going to be tricky because this is a 4 o'clock Eastern game, so you limit your options in terms of what's available. But if you have Brian Thomas, and let's say you're hoping to start him for this week, and then you have an open roster spot, pick up Parker Washington, who's only 3.6% available in ESPN leagues, despite having a pretty good performance last week. I think that he is. If you have Brian Thomas and then you're waiting to see what happens with that game time decision, you just roster Parker Washington, and then you could flip them if needed. I think that's the move to make there if you have Washington. All right. So for those of you that have been watching, comment any questions that you have below. I'm going to go through each game, the guys that I would start and sit in just a sec. But if you have any questions pertaining to your lineup, guys that you're looking at starting or sitting, comment in this chat and I will get to it right away. Your questions are first priority. So we'll let that guide the majority of this, what your questions are. But if not, I'm going to be going through each game. So comment any questions that you have below on your team, and I will get to that as we go through it. So the first game that I'm going to talk about today is the Cowboys and the Falcons. So what do you do with Dallas? Dak Prescott, or am I looking to start or sit him? I think that Dak Prescott will be effective in this game. I'm not really loving this start just because this offense has got some problems and very much relied upon garbage time points. But I think that if you got a 2-quarterback league, I think that he's a decent start. I'm looking at him around the QB 15 for this week, though. So I think there are some better options out there. I like Rico Dowdle as a start for this week. I think that he's a guy that's probably been dropped in a lot of places because he hasn't been on the field lately and they had a bye recently. I think he gets right back into it and is effective. I don't think there is any world in which Dalvin Cook significantly takes away touches from Rico Dowdle, who he's been decent this season. The problem is that the whole offense has just been bad. No questions asked, you fire up CeeDee Lamb. I don't love the other receivers, though. We've seen a little bit of a roulette of Tolbert, Turpin, Brandon Cooks when he was healthy. So I would be looking elsewhere. Pretty much all the receivers that I've already mentioned among the lightly rostered starts are somebody that if you had Jalen Tolbert, I would drop Tolbert to pick any of those guys up. So Lamb is the only receiver I'd be looking to start. Jake Ferguson is a sneaky start for this week as well. I think that he's pretty much the second receiver on this team. He got a lot of targets last week. This is a great bounce back week for Jake Ferguson. So let's look at Ferguson versus the other tight end in this matchup, Kyle Pitts. Who would I play? You stay in the flames with Pitts, but Jake Ferguson is somebody that I would like if over a guy like Zach Ertz, for example, somebody along that tier of players. Aubrey, obviously you play him anytime you have him. Dallas Cowboys, I know that the only reason I bring up them is because they're a defense that has been highly effective for a long time in fantasy, but this year have not been cutting it. And I think that they're honestly a defense that I would just cut at this point in the season. Atlanta. So we talked about Dak Prescott. Would you start Prescott or Kirk Cousins? And in this, I would go with Kirk Cousins just because I feel more comfortable with the options that they have on offense to go to. He's been playing pretty well in the second half of the games that we've had so far this season. So I would go Kirk Cousins in this matchup. Not Brian Robinson. Bijan Robinson obviously is another great start for this week. Tyler Algier. Maybe if you're in a pinch, but I think that so let's look at Algier versus Miles Sanders, the streaming option. You probably would be safer to play Algier than Miles Sanders, but if you're trying to go for a higher floor, I would go with Sanders because I think that there's a possibility that Sanders, especially if you're in a PPR league, that maybe he gets a touchdown and then he ends up with a performance that's probably better than what Breece Hall did this week because Breece Hall was not great for week 9. So Algier probably sit for this week. These receivers, what would I do? London, lock him in. Mooney, flex caliber receiver. I don't love him for this week, but I think he will be good. McLeod and Hodge, no. Kyle Pitts, fire him up. He's one of the best options available at tight end. Not interested in this Falcons defense. And Koo, I think he's good because of the fact that they're going to be playing in a dome. And we'll talk about this later, but really pay attention to these kicking matchups in games where there's inclement weather. So I'll talk about a game where this could be a problem, which is going to be Green Bay and Detroit, because both McManus and Bates have been pretty good kickers this season, but that game is projected to have 15-mile-an-hour winds and rain, which does not sound like great kicking conditions. So especially as we're getting into this period of season now where we're starting to get some bad weather, you got to really pay attention to those kicking matchups because that is really one of the things that can make or break your week. All right. If you got any other questions about the Dallas-Atlanta game, comment that in the comment section. But we will move on to Denver and Baltimore. This game is going to be very interesting to see what happens if Denver can keep up their strong performances of late against a pretty good team. I like Bo Nix, as I've already talked about. He's been great ever since so he's the QB9 right now on the season, and he had a terrible week 1 and 2. So he's really starting to get into the flow of things. We just saw Jameis Winston have pretty good success against Baltimore last week. So if you have Bo Nix, I'd play him this week. Among that last game that we talked about, would you play Bo Nix over Prescott and Cousins? I would play Cousins over Nix, but I would play Nix over Prescott personally. But still, Bo Nix, great start for this week. I like him against Baltimore as a starting option for this week. I don't like these running backs. I think Javonte Williams and McLaughlin are both sits for reasons I talked about earlier. Among these wide receivers, I would play Cortland Sutton. I would not play the other guys because there's still a little bit of murkiness of is the Valet the second receiver? Is Marvin Mims, Lil Jordan Humphrey? Probably, I feel confident that it's going to be Troy Franklin as the season progresses, but I think for this matchup, I'm using this as a wait-and-see approach because Denver's been effective just with ball control, but in this game, they're going to be behind. They're going to be throwing it a lot. I'm curious to see how the target breakdown goes. Adam Troutman is a player that I'm going to be sitting this week. I talked about him earlier as a stash consideration, who's only 0.3% rostered, but I would not be trying to play him for this week. Will Lutz, I would not really be interested in him for this week. I think that there's better kickers that you can have. And then the Broncos defense, which is a great defense, I'd be sitting them for this week. I'd be trying to find some other options. And there's some great streaming options available, like the Washington Commanders, the Philadelphia Eagles, the New Orleans Saints. Those are all options that I would play over the Broncos. So if you have the Broncos, you've been riding them for a few weeks, check to see if those other defenses are out there, because I think that's a great pivot that you can make right before the game starts in about an hour. All right. So just going to adjust something real quick, and then we will get to the Baltimore Ravens. So if you have any last-minute questions, as I said, just comment that in the question below. Your questions are the priority. So I'm going to go to that if you got any questions that you have. Doesn't have to be start sit too. It could just be, general like football stuff in relation to like, Dylan has had some questions about like what you do with your keepers, trade ideas, things like that. Comment away if you have anything that you want to ask. All right. So who would I be looking to start and sit from the Ravens? So Lamar Jackson, obviously. Derrick Henry, obviously. Those are guys you just plug and play every week. What do you do with Justice Hill? Is this a game where he gets more involved? I think that Justice Hill is just a guy that if you want to put DFS money into him and see if he goes off, then take the chance. But I mean, we've seen such a dichotomy between great games and terrible games with him that I would not really be interested in playing him. I think there's other options. So like Miles Sanders, as I talked about earlier, my under 40% start for this week, I'd play him over Justice Hill. All right, this receiving core. Deontay Johnson traded to Baltimore, as we've talked about. What does this do to everybody else? Bateman, I do not like for this week. Flowers, I would play him. I don't like Flowers' consistency, but I think that he's too effective when he does go off that you can't really risk sitting him. Deontay Johnson, as I said earlier, is pretty much a bench in all situations. I'm honestly very low on his value rest of season. I think there could be a situation where he becomes droppable as the season progresses. I would not do that right now. Curious to see how this breaks down, but I'm really not a fan of this trade for Deontay Johnson's value. Mark Andrews, I'd play him again, like that terrible Luke Bryan song. Sorry, that was a terrible joke. But I think he's just been so effective the last few weeks that you just keep rolling with him and just put him out there again. So what do you do between Mark Andrews and Jake Ferguson? That it would be a very good hypothetical question. If you're looking for a safer play, I'd go Ferguson. I like the tight ends that get more consistent targets, but Andrews, I think that he's going to be effective again this week as they're still trying to integrate Deontay Johnson. I think that he is a pretty good play for this week to put Mark Andrews in there. All right. And then Justin Tucker, play him. Ravens defense. They're heavily rostered, but they've not really been a very effective unit this year. I think there are better options. As I mentioned, the Commanders, Saints, the Eagles, those are all better options to me than the Baltimore Ravens defense. All right. We will move to the next game, which is Miami and Buffalo. So what do you do with the Dolphins players? So for the Miami Dolphins, I would start Tua. I don't feel great about it, but I foresee that this team is going to need to pass in this game, and you hope that he can, get Tyreek Hill involved. I think that if you're looking at the guys that I mentioned earlier, like Cousins and Nix, Tua kind of falls around that same range. I would feel more comfortable playing Kirk Cousins. I'd probably go Tua over Bo Nix, but it's very close. And among the running backs, Devon Achane, yes, fire him up. Raheem Mostert, he falls into that tier among the Miles Sanders, where if you have a Mostert or a Miles Sanders, it becomes an interesting question. I think that there's a better probability that Miles Sanders has a better game than Raheem Mostert, though, so I would not really be looking his way. And then Jay Wright is obviously just a streaming guy or a stash guy that you want to just have and see what happens if Achane gets injured, as he seems to get injured every other week. And then among the wide receivers, Hill, you play him. Waddle, I think he becomes a streaming option again. Don't love him, but he is somebody that is getting a lot of targets, even though he's not had some great performances. He was getting targets even with the hodgepodge of quarterbacks that they were throwing in when Tua was injured. I think he's a decent play this week. He's kind of more in that flex tier, though. The other receivers, no. Jonnu Smith and Smith are not considerations for me, even though Jonnu Smith was effective. I'm talking about Dylan Smith. I think that's how you say his name. Not interested in their kicker or defense. And then Buffalo. So Josh Allen, obvious play. James Cook, obvious play. I just want to bring up Ray Davis real quick in that if you have Ray Davis, or I'm sorry, if you have James Cook and you're trying to, find a running back on your bench, Ray Davis is probably a better guy to have than a Miles Sanders, because if anything happens to Cook, we already saw how effective he was last week. You want to make sure that you have Davis, who has already been effective too. So I would personally be trying to hold on to anything that you can hold on to that Bills effective running game and make sure that you have Ray Davis rostered if you have James Cook. Wide receivers, yeah, I mean, I would be sitting Amari Cooper personally. I just think until you really see that elite level game with him, I'm not comfortable playing him. I think among these receivers, I think the safest that you can get is probably going to be Khalil Shakir because of the volume of mid-range targets. You're hoping for a good PPR performance there. I am interested in Keon Coleman, but I don't love him as a play for this week. So in general, most of these receivers are sits for me, except for Shakir if you really need somebody. I think this is a decent defense to play with Buffalo here, but I think that the better option is to go with some of these streaming options if you can get them. All right, next game, New Orleans and Carolina. So what do you do with the QBs? And we'll talk about Taysom Hill a little bit too. So Derek Carr, as I already talked about in this video, he's a great play for this week. I don't like him over the guys like Bo Nix and Stafford, etc. But I think if you're looking, all these quarterbacks that we mentioned so far, I would probably play over Derek Carr. But I think if you're I just want to say that as a confidence boost for those of you in 2 QB leagues where he's out there, that he is a good play over some of your flex availabilities that you may have. What do you do with Taysom Hill? Taysom Hill is somebody that is a dart throw. And this just feels like a game where Taysom Hill will be effective. I am personally not very interested in playing him. I'm never interested in playing Taysom Hill. But I do think that this is an opportunity where Taysom Hill, maybe he does have a good game. I do see this being one of his – he either goes for 2 touchdowns and gets 20 fantasy points, or he rarely touches the ball. And I think that this is a situation where, he's coming back from injury. And then if he has a great game against Carolina, which is very well possible, then people will be, I need a tight end. I need my Brock Bowers replacement for week 10. What do I do? Maybe I'll trade for Taysom Hill. And then that's your perfect opportunity to trade him away and get a piece that will be more valuable rest of season. So this is just purely a stash and try to flip him for value. Running backs. Alvin Kamara is a start for this week. Another great play. You never want to take him out of your lineup unless there's something really concerning. And then for the wide receivers, it's Chris Olave, and that's it. I'm not interested in any of these other guys on the Saints. I think Olave is one of the best starts that you can have just because of pure volume. But I would not be surprised if one of these guys does have a great game and goes off. Among the tight ends, I'm not interested in these Saints tight ends. There's too much variability between Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, etc. So just avoid them, even despite what might be a tempting matchup with Carolina. And the Saints defense, as I mentioned, is a great streaming option. Blake Groupie, as well as for a kicking option, is another very good option as well that you can start for this week if you need somebody to play. All right, the Panthers. Bryce Young. I know even if you're in a 2 QB league, I would not be looking to play Bryce Young. It's just, I think it's pretty bleak. I'm hoping he can turn things around just for the player, but I'm just not really very enthusiastic about him. Chuba Hubbard, I do like as a start. Don't love it. Miles Sanders, as I mentioned, is a start that is a pretty good option if you're under 40% roster, but you're relying upon that volume of receptions that he had last week, which is risky, but among the guys out there, and if you're really in a pinch, it's probably one of the best risks that you could take. So both these running backs are interesting to me. Don't love them, but I think that they can give you some consistent value, especially in PPR formats. I would not be looking to start any of these wide receivers this week. We'll get Thielen if he plays, Coker, would not be looking to start any of these guys, but I am monitoring this situation forward to see what the tendencies are now that Deontay Johnson is gone, who Bryce Young is going to be targeting. All right. Among the tight ends, Jatavion Sanders is interesting, as I have said, because he is an effective player that can has had some targets, and he's young. Maybe they get him more involved as the season moves along, but he kind of had a down week last week, so not really as interested in him. Just monitor that because somebody is going to need to fill the Deontay Johnson void. The bluff for this bottom line for this week is that none of these guys are startable among the receiving options, but monitor it because I think that they could be a great waiver pickup for the following week. All right. So for those of you that are new, comment any questions you have for this week. That takes priority over anything that I am talking about with each team-by-team matchup. So comment your questions below, and I will answer them. All right. So we will move to the Las Vegas Raiders and the Cincinnati Bengals. Another 1 o'clock game. Gardner Minshew, do not play him. Alexander Mattison, I think, is a pretty good play for this week just because of reception volume. Not a great option, but he's a good flex player just off of the volume that he gets. There was a question earlier about would you start Jacoby Myers, and I think that he is a great start for this week because I think that Cincinnati is not a good pass defense, and I think that him and Brock Bowers are going to have great games. Trey Tucker is just a hypothetical right now. We thought he could get more involved. Hasn't really happened, so not as interested in him. But just keep monitoring that because I would not be surprised if he does become a more effective receiver in fantasy as it goes along. Comment your questions below on your team, and I will get to that right away. Brock Bowers is a must start for this week, as always. And do not consider the Raiders kicker or defense for this week. But neither of them are good plays, so just don't even go there. Cincinnati. So Joe Burrow, I like him as a start for this week. He is a top 10 quarterback for me this week against Vegas. I think that he's going to blow them out of the water. Chase Brown is an excellent start as well among the running backs, especially with Zach Moss being out. Make sure that you get Chase Brown in your lineup today because he is going to be very effective. And Travion Williams, as I mentioned earlier, I would not be surprised if he gets a last-minute touchdown today. That could be, maybe he becomes somebody that is looked at on waivers, but I'm not starting him for this week. I'm just monitoring this because maybe Cincinnati's can continue to use two backs, even with the information. Like even if Moss stays out, I would be interested to see how this goes. So a question from Marshall about do you trade Baker for Ramondre? So who are your other running backs? Because I am not a big Ramondre fan, as you probably know. And I think if you can get Baker for him, considering that you're giving up Hurts, I would probably do that. But I'm just curious who else you have on your team. So more on Cincinnati, Jamar Chase, fire him up. I see this as interesting because he's not playing, because Higgins is not playing. But I would not be trying to start Andre Iosivas this week. I think that that's more of a trap play. I would be trying to play Gesicki if you have him. So, if you're some of the tight ends we talked about earlier, like Jake Ferguson, I would go Gesicki this week over Jake Ferguson. Personally, I think that is a better play to do that. And I think that, Gesicki falls into that tier of guys where you have he's probably going to be somewhere within the top 10 to 15. And if you're in a deep league, I think that makes Gesicki a very attractive play. Rashad White, Montgomery, Brooks, and Tank Bigsby. So you'd have to trade Ramondre to get Baker. Do you have any other quarterbacks that are either on your roster or on waivers? Because I would probably do that. I would just make sure that you have other running backs that you can pivot to. I think that so I'm just thinking real quick. I would probably make that trade, but you really need to make sure that moving forward this season that you're really monitoring the running back situation and that you're keeping tabs on guys that are both handcuffs or injuries or trends going on in the backfield, because I think that you'll be good with Montgomery pacing a pretty consistent running back play, and then you can get in a good streaming option like Rachaad White. And then the nice thing is that Rachaad White is probably going to get a lot of receptions moving forward as well, so that's very interesting. Detroit has already had their bye too, I believe they have. Yeah, Detroit's already had their bye, so you have Montgomery moving forward. I'd make this trade personally. I think that's good. You get Baker, top 10 quarterback rest of the season, and you kind of get a stack with Rachaad White too if he gets receiving touchdowns. So I'd do that. Just let me know if there are any QBs on waivers that might be you might consider streaming in. But I think Ramondre is a great sell candidate. Probably would make that trade. All right, we will move to the next game, Los Angeles and Cleveland, the Los Angeles Chargers, by the way. So Justin Herbert, I like him for this week. He doesn't raise higher to me than like Stafford, Bo Nix, those guys, but in those deep leagues, I think that he is a good play. J.K. Dobbins falls into that top 20 to 25 range of running backs that I think that if you need a RB2, he would be pretty good. As I mentioned earlier, Vidal is somebody to stash if you have Dobbins on your team, because I think that he will be a pretty good play moving forward, especially if Dobbins gets injured. Dobbins has a lengthy injury history. This team likes to run the ball. Vidal is an interesting stash. Not somebody that you want to be playing, but if you have Dobbins, I'd be stashing Vidal to just monitor that and cover yourself in case one of your top running backs is injured. McConkey, play him. Quentin Johnson, as I said earlier, I'd play him. It's a 16-team league, so not many other options. Stacked at wide receiver, but yes, running back situation is tough playing handcuffs and waivers are light. But I do think in your situation, though, because you have Rachaad White and Montgomery, which are both pretty good options, and then you're relying on Jonathan Brooks, which is a very much a great upside play. Make sure you hold on to him. I would, if I were you, what I would do is make the trade and then just scour the waivers, see if guys like Braylon Allen, Ty Chandler, Kenneth Gainwell, guys like that are handcuffs are available, and then roster them, because then if anything happens to let's say something happens to Breece Hall and then he tears his ACL and then you pick up Braylon Allen. Well, now you've got another running back that's a starting running back rest of the season. So I would do that. I think that Ramondre is just going to be fool's gold, to be honest, because whenever the Patriots are trailing by a lot, they're not going to be using him very often. So if you could use that to get Baker, I probably would do that. And then just pay close attention to the running back waiver situation, especially since it's a 16-team league. All right. Back to the Chargers. Will Disley, I would not play him. He's had some pretty good target volume the last two games. And for those of you that are on here, ask any questions you got. We've got 35 minutes until the game. Comment on anything that you want to ask about below, and I will get to it right away. And we got a question from Adam. Would you trade away Jacobs and Downs for London and Hopkins? What does your running back situation look like? Because I like Drake London a lot, and I think that if you need a wide receiver 2 or with wide receiver 1 upside rest of the season, then maybe. But you have Gibbs and Chase Brown. What are your wide receivers? You need a 1. Yeah, I would probably do that, to be honest with you. I think Downs is interesting, but I think that if you could get Drake London, which I think is going to be like locked in as a top 15 receiver rest of season. Josh Downs has been pretty good, but we don't really know what Joe Flacco's tendencies are going to be versus Anthony Richardson. So, what if like, Josh Downs had a great play last week where he got a wide open touchdown, but what if Joe Flacco gets hurt and then they have to go back to Richardson? Whereas with London, I mean, he's pretty much locked in with that Falcons room, and you got Waddle and McConkey. So, I mean, yeah, you can't be relying upon Jaden Waddle if that's your second receiver. So I would make that trade. Hopkins as well is interesting. I don't love Hopkins rest of the season, but I do think that they do need a second receiver to step up after Kelsey. And I think that I would be trying to take that. And yeah, that I think that he could be good with Mahomes. I'm not expecting anything close to what he was doing with the Texans or with the Cardinals, but I think that if you're getting Drake London, I think that's probably the best move that you can make given your team's situation. Thanks, Adam. And if you got any other questions, just comment below and I will get to it before these games start today. The Browns. So we're going through right now the Chargers and Browns, going through all the games leading up to this week. Jameis is somebody that I would put in if you're in a 2 QB league. Okay, great. Yeah, let me know how that goes through for you. Jameis, I'd probably play for this week if you're in a 2 QB league, but I mean, the turnovers are just always a concern with him. So, to me, like, unless he's more of like a DFS stream if you're trying to make money, I would not love to play him this week, but I think in 2 QB leagues, he's somebody that you can put in there. Chubb, I would be sitting Nick Chubb. He doesn't really give you much passing volume, and the Chargers have a pretty good run defense, so do not play Nick Chubb for this week. Also, do not look at any of these other running backs, but I highly doubt it at this point that any of them are rostered on the Browns. The wide receivers, Cedric Tillman, I'd play him again for this week. I would also consider playing Judy and Moore, but I do not love them. I think that they're more of a DFS play. But I do think that there's a good world that they get involved. But they're, to me, more guys that I would have on my bench and then try to flip them if they have a great game. Like, let's say Elijah Moore goes off for like 20-plus fantasy points in 2 PPR. He would immediately jump to the top of my list of guys that I would be trying to flip for a more consistent player rest of season. The tight end that I love for this week is David Njoku. He's a top 8 tight end to me this week. I think that he's somebody that you really want to put in there, obviously, if you have him. Just keep an eye out, though, for, as I've kind of talked about on the show already today, Njoku has his bye next week. So make sure that you got a fallback option to replace Njoku for week 10. All right. And then kicker and defense for the Browns, not interested. All right. Commanders and the Giants. So Jaden Daniels, play him. News that came out today is that Brian Robinson is out. So Austin Eckler, I would start him. Jerry McNichols, if you're in a pinch, and he's another guy, I didn't mention him in my earlier segment on under 40% rostered. You can check that out a couple minutes back in this video, probably more like an hour back at this point. But you could Jeremy McNichols is somebody that is going to be highly available right now. And if you're really in a pinch, I think that is a great pickup as well, because we've seen this Commanders team use multiple running backs and be effective with 2 guys at a time. Eckler, start him. McNichols enters into that interesting streaming category where I think you could play him depending on what else you have. McLaurin, play him. Same with these other receivers. I'm not really looking to play any of them, but I am monitoring Noah Brown because I think that he is the guy that has the best opportunity moving forward to step up as the second receiver. Then among the tight ends, Zach Ertz. I mean, I guess you could play Zach Ertz, but I don't love it. I would only really look to do it if you are in a deep league and you don't have a lot of other options. But as I mentioned, guys like Jake Ferguson that I've talked about, I'd play him over Zach Ertz. I would play Gesicki over Zach Ertz. Gesicki's only 10% available. I brought him up earlier in this video. I think that is something that I would take a look at. Austin Seibert as well, one of the most underrated kickers in fantasy. I would definitely play him again this week. And then the Commanders are a team that is very good defensively over the last few weeks, and they get a nice matchup today. They are a great streaming option that I'd be looking to play over teams like the Broncos that have a tough matchup. What do you do with the Giants? Daniel Jones, I would not trust him this week. Sit him. Tyrone Tracy. So clear concussion protocol. I love this guy rest of season moving forward. And I mentioned this in an earlier video on my channel, but Tyrone Tracy has one of the best running back schedules rest of season. So if you could play him this matchup, I would. But if anything, if you could trade for him, I would recommend doing that. Some trade candidates I brought up earlier in this video, like Ramondre Stevenson. I would trade Ramondre Stevenson for Tyrone Tracy. And yes, that sounds crazy, but Patriots have a tough schedule. They also are not a good team. They don't need to run the ball a lot. They don't get the opportunity to run the ball a lot because they're not that good. And then Tracy has an amazing schedule rest of season. So this is a great trade target. You probably missed your window with how he played last week to do it, but I love Tyrone Tracy rest of season. Malik Neighbors, play him. Wandale, I think, is a safe play as well. Kind of falls into that tier of flex guys. Among the guys I talked about earlier, I'd probably still play Wandale over Quentin Johnson and Parker Washington among my guys to consider streaming, but don't love it. Slayton and everybody else on the receiving core sit. Tight ends sit. And then the defense and kicker, you want to sit for this team too. All right, next we have probably our most brutal fantasy game of the day. So this one will be pretty quick. The Patriots and the Titans. I would not play Drake May. I would not play Ramondre Stevenson. Although I do think that this is a possibility where Stevenson has an effective game because this is a relatively beatable opponent. But they do have a good run defense with Jeffrey Simmons up the middle. So it could be a tough game for Ramondre. I'm not interested in these receivers. I really was high on Demario Douglas, and I think I would still keep an eye on him over the next few weeks and see if he starts to get his target volume back up. Because he had a nice stretch there in October where he was starting to get more involvement. But they really do not have a good wide receiver one on this team that I trust. I'm really only looking at Douglas as somebody that I would maybe roster in deep leagues, but do not play any of these guys this week. Hunter Henry falls into that tier of guys that you could play if you really are desperate. But as I mentioned, like the Gesicki's out there are probably better plays than Hunter Henry. And then no to Joey Sly. I'm just going to talk both these defenses real quick. You could play them. I think that they are pretty good defense. They're pretty good matchups because of how bad the offenses are, that I think you can get away with playing both of these teams. But I would not feel super confident with it because I think that there's some deficiencies on this defense as there is. But honestly, the defenses might be the best scoring units on this team for this matchup because it's not a lot of great options. Do not play Mason Rudolph. Do not do it. Tony Pollard is probably the best start among the players in this game, but I still would not feel very confident about it. You're just hoping that, because of Tajay Spears' injury, that maybe he can get even more work. Maybe he can get some passing volume. What do you do with Calvin Ridley? Because he just went off last week, had an excellent game, but that was still just one quarter in which he got the majority of his points. So Ridley is somebody you want to stash. You want to see how this develops because they have the best wide receiver schedule remaining rest of season. This Titans unit does. So make sure that you're keeping an eye on this situation, but I would not play him for this week. He's probably going to draw Christian Gonzalez, which is a pretty good cornerback. I'd be sitting Calvin Ridley, but I am trying to make sure he's on my roster for the stretch run as this develops over time because they do not have any other good receiving options other than Ridley. Not play these tight ends or Nick Folk. All right. So comment any questions you have. We have 25 minutes left until kickoff. And if you got any last minute questions of things you want to do with your lineup, that's going to be top priority on this video. So comment that below and I will get to it right away because that's what my channel is about, is helping you in your fantasy lineups. So if you want to ask any question, fire away and I will get to that before. I'm just going through these games right now as part of the agenda for players that I would start and sit for this week. All right, Chicago and Arizona. We move to our late game slate for today. What do you do with Caleb Williams? I'd play him. I don't feel like it's a great game, a great matchup, but, I do like him around that same range as Bo Nix, the same range as Matt Stafford. I think that Caleb Williams will be a little more effective than his projections suggest because Arizona is a pretty good matchup for quarterbacks in terms of passing volume, etc. I would be trying to play Caleb Williams, especially in 2 QB leagues, make sure he's played. The running backs, DeAndre Swift, I would play. Rashawn Johnson is more of that handcuff right now that has some opportunity potential. And, maybe there's a chance in this game that he, against Arizona's porous defense, has a touchdown, but I would not be trying to take that bet, and I would sit him. All right, this receiving core is interesting. What do you do with Chicago's receivers? I'd play DJ Moore, I'd sit Rome Odunze, and I'd sit Keenan Allen. But Keenan Allen is an interesting buy low candidate because he had 97% of snaps last week, and Caleb Williams is getting better as a passer. So Keenan Allen is somebody that people are pretty low on because of how he started the season, but I think that he can still be pretty effective moving forward. Do you play Cole Kmet? I would not play him. Cole Kmet is a very up and down player. Arizona has historically been a pretty bad defense against tight ends, but they are getting better at defending it. And just because of all the other receiving options there, Kmet is not a consistent target I'd rely upon. I would be looking more at your other options that are getting more targets, like Gesicki, as I've talked about, like Jake Ferguson, like I've talked about. Cole Kmet would be a no for me. And not playing the kicker or the Bears. Cairo Santos is actually a decent option because they are playing in a dome, and the game I'm going to get to in a little bit with 2 good kickers are playing in a rainstorm right now. So that'll be something to monitor moving forward. Comment any questions you got before week 9. If you got any questions on your lineup last minute before these games start, fire away in the comments. I'll get to that right away. All right, Arizona. Who would I start and sit among these players? Kyler Murray, I'd play. James Conner, I'd play. I think James Conner is a great play for this week. Love him in this matchup against Chicago. Marvin Harrison, I'm cautious about this game because he draws a tough matchup against the Bears. They've been very effective against wide receivers, but Harrison has so much upside, and you really cannot sit him because I think that there's very few players that have the opportunity of a void that needs to be filled on this team in terms of receiving. He's very talented, top pick. I think you still play him, but I'm lowering my expectations for what he's going to do this week. Michael Wilson is a dart throw for this week. Don't love him, but I would not be trying to put him in there over some of these guys like Parker Washington, Quentin Johnson, guys like that I mentioned earlier. Trey McBride, play him. Chad Ryland, the kicker, maybe. Don't love it. And I would not be interested in this defense. All right. And as I said earlier, we've got 20 minutes for kickoff. So comment any questions you got below before this week, and I will get to it right away. Jags and the Eagles. So as of now, I do not believe we have a game time decision on what is going to happen with Brian Thomas. He's expected to play, or Travis Etienne, who is also expected to play. That's good. But we have been fooled before. So just keep an eye out for that. It's a late game. Make sure you have a pivot option for these players. Trevor Lawrence, I am not interested in playing him, but I don't think that it's a bad call because he's going to get some volume. He kind of falls to me in that 15 to 20 range. So 2 QB leagues play him. Other 1 quarterback leagues, I would not be looking to play him. Etienne, if he plays, I think he's going to have a good game because I think he's going to get involved in pass catching. With the injuries to Kirk and Gabe Davis, they need pass catchers, and I think Etienne is a good candidate to fill that void. Not interested in Tanks Bigsby, though. I think this is going to set up as a tough matchup for him. Thomas, if he plays, obviously put him in. As I talked about earlier, Parker Washington is only 3% rostered ESPN leagues right now. So if you have Brian Thomas, pick up Parker Washington as a handcuff, because if Brian Thomas does not play, you can plug in Parker Washington, and I think he will still be effective for you. So that's something that I would recommend doing if you don't have a lot of options, because this is a 4:00 game. You lose out on all those guys you could have put in earlier. Tight ends, Evan Ingram is a great play for this week. Top 10 tight end to me with top 5 upside. Brenton Strange, it's a guy to monitor because they used 2 tight ends and both of them were effective in fantasy last week, but not really interested in him. Just keep an eye on it for when you're looking at waivers for next week. Defense and kicker for this team, no. Eagles, Hurts, fire him up. Barkley, fire him up. Gainwell, make sure he's rostered if you have Barkley, because he's likely available if anything happens to Saquon. Gainwell has been good this season. A.J. Brown, you play him. Devontae Smith, you play him. This is a great matchup for wide receivers throughout the season, so I'm expecting their pass catchers are going to go off this game. They're great start candidates. Devontae Smith, if you're in those shallow leagues where you have a lot of great options, I'd be trying to play Devontae Smith this week. I think he will be excellent. But let's look at the other end of the spectrum. Deep leagues, do you play guys like Jahan Dotson? And that would be a no to me. I would not be tempted by the matchup with somebody like him. So Dallas Goedert is out. Would you play Grant Calcaterra in those deep league tight ends? I would not do that personally. I think there's a lot of better options, like, Gesicki, Cole Kmet. I would be doing that over Calcaterra. Jake Elliott, I think, is a good kicking play for this week, and I think this Eagles defense, which has is lightly rostered because they kind of start off the season poorly, but I think they will be an effective matchup for this week. If you have a team like the Broncos, as I mentioned earlier, I would play the Eagles over them. All right, so the Lions and the Packers. So weather update. We got to pay attention to these weather updates in the second half of the season, and this game is expected to have 15-mile-an-hour winds and rain. So that sounds like it could be pretty bad for some of these pass catchers potentially. So what do you do with this game? Do you play guys like Jared Goff in that situation? And I would still, with Jared Goff, he's doing well. I would still play him. I would not love him over an option like Cousins. I think Cousins against Dallas is a great matchup, so I would play him over Jared Goff. But if you're looking at, guys like Caleb Williams, I think that Jared Goff is probably a better play than that. But this weather is going to be interesting to monitor as this moves forward. So because of that, if you got Gibbs and Montgomery, I'm expecting them to have great games. I'm suspecting that Amon-Ra St. Brown has a better game than he had last week. I do think that this weather makes things interesting, though. But among the pass-catching options, I think St. Brown and Laporta will be good. But I am not suspecting great things from them. I'm expecting this to be a more ground-controlled game and could be ugly. So then what do you do with Jake Bates, who has been an effective kicker this season, but, 15-mile-an-hour winds and rain? A little concerning to me. So if you got other kicking options, if you're playing the kicker streaming game, you got a Blake Groupie available, I would switch over to that because you've got a better weather situation. We just looked at among these late games, the Cardinals and Bears options like Cairo Santos. I would play Cairo Santos over Bates and McManus because I just think that there's a better possibility in a dome that you're not worrying about the weather elements and you don't run the risk of them putting up a straight 0 or even negative points depending on how bad it gets. So consider that. That's a very important thing to keep an eye on as the season progresses. All right, 15 minutes left. If you got any last-minute questions, comment in this video. I will get to it right away. We're getting into the crunch time before these 1 p.m. games starts. All right, for Green Bay, Jordan Love, I would play him. I know he's got some injury concerns. What do you do if he does not play? Malik Willis, I would still play him. Which more? DJ Moore or a different one? If it's DJ, I would go him over Xavier Legette. Elijah. Elijah Moore or Legette? Let's see. I would take my chance on Legette because I think there's a better chance that he is the wide receiver 1. I think Elijah Moore falls into that tier of the, he's probably the 4th wide receiver on that team. So because of that, I think Legette could get more involved. He gives you more pass catching volume. I think that's a better play, personally. Elijah Moore, you'd just be relying on a touchdown, and I personally would not want to go there. All right, so we will go back to Green Bay. Josh Jacobs, I would not play him if you have him because he's got an injury issue going on. Detroit is a great run defense. I think this sets up as a pretty mediocre performance. So like Chase Brown or Josh Jacobs, I'd go Chase Brown. These receivers, I do want to bring up, I talked about him briefly, but Malik Willis, if he does play over Jordan Love, I think Malik Willis is still a solid play because he gives you rushing value. And, with this rain situation that's going on in this game, I think that he could still be very effective. Receivers. What do you do with the Packers receivers? They've been a lot of up and down performances with these guys. Dobbs has been hot. Jaden Reed started hot, but it's been pretty cold the last few weeks. And then Christian Watson is a very long bomb dependent receiver. This depends on if Jordan Love plays, because I think if Malik Willis plays, I think all these guys are sits. And then you've also got the weather component to it as well. So among these streaming options, so we look at Londonville Jaguars fan Moore or Leggett, Elijah Moore or Leggett. Would you play those guys over these Packers receivers? I would play I would still put Jaden Reed out there over them because he's a great player. He's in a slump, but you're playing with the hopes that he can regain that form and is effective in this next week. Dobbs, I would play Leggett over Dobbs, and then Watson and Wicks would be behind both Elijah Moore and Xavier Leggett. All right. Tucker Kraft, I think he's a solid play for this week. Don't love him, but I do think he is a decent option for you. And as I mentioned, these kickers could be in for a rough performance with the weather, so just keep an eye on that. The Rams and the Seahawks. We got 2 games left for today, and then we got the Monday night game. All right, so we will switch to the Rams. Matt Stafford, I would play, as I mentioned. He is my start among the guys that are under 40% rostered but available. Kyron Williams, you play him. Blake Corum, you roster him, but you don't play him. And especially if you have Kyron Williams, you want to make sure you have Corum. But if you have Corum versus, you don't really need if you need somebody to play or you're trying to see what happens, I would pick up Miles Sanders first if you need somebody to play for this week. But I would not be looking to not be really interested in Corum rest of the season unless Kyron Williams gets injured. Okay, Titans defense or the Chargers. Winston is interesting. He almost threw 3 picks last week. Yeah, he does that almost every game, it seems. But he also threw a lot of touchdowns. Meanwhile, May is starting and Pollard is hurting. Titans defense or the Chargers. So to me, I would probably go the Titans in that game. I do think that the Chargers have a good projection, but like you said, Winston is probably going to get a lot of pass volume and generate a situation where they may not be a great play. I think the Titans defense would be the one I would go to among them. But I think among those, the 3 defenses that I really like that are great streaming options are the Commanders, the Saints, and the Eagles. So I think if you could pick any of those 3 over the Titans, I would do that. But of those 2, I would go the Titans over the Chargers. Nakua and Nakup, back to that Rams and Seahawks game. Those guys, you fire them up. You do not play Robinson, Whittington, Atwell. Those guys are really not even rosterable anymore with both Nakua and Kupp being there. What if Puka does not play? Do you consider, those other receivers? I would not, because I think that we've seen too much of a roulette where different guys get involved and have different games. If Nakua is out, I would not be tempted to put one of these other Rams in there. I would more be looking at Parker Washington in that same afternoon slate of games. Colby Parkinson is not a start for me. Neither are the kicker or the Rams defense. The Seahawks. So Geno has kind of struggled of late. So because of that, I don't like him as much among the guys like the Staffords, the Cousins, even the Dak Prescott. So I would not try to play Geno. Kenneth Walker, I think you can rely on him and he could be a good play. I know that he kind of had a scare last week where he didn't really play that well, and then Charbonnet got more involved, but that was more just based on the game script. I think you can go back to Kenneth Walker this week with confidence. DK Metcalf is not playing, and Jackson Smith and Jigba I think could be a good play this week. The Rams have struggled at times in their pass defense. So because of that, I think Smith and Jigba is a good play. And, Lockett, man, disappointed me last week. I thought he was going to have a good game, but he only had one catch. So because of that, until he proves it again, I'm not putting him back in my lineup. So I would only really be looking to play Jackson Smith and Jigba among these receivers, but I do think there's a lot of upside for him. And then not interested in the tight ends. Jason Myers is a solid kicker, and I think that this is a good play for him this week. And then the Seahawks defense, not really interested in. All right, so 10 minutes left before these games. So if you got any last-minute questions, comment them, and I will get to them as soon as I can. I'm just going through these games as my agenda for today, but if you have any questions, answer or comment that, and I will get to it. Colts and the Vikings. This is our evening game today. Do you play Joe Flacco? I don't love him this week against the Vikings. I think that's a solid defense. But, if you're looking at, like Joe Flacco versus Jameis Winston, I would play Flacco. Jonathan Taylor, you play him. You roster Tyler Goodson among the two handcuffs for Taylor. I'm not really high on Sermon, and I think that if you're trying to cover your RB1, and if it's Jonathan Taylor, then I would make sure to have Goodson. Among these receivers, Josh Downs, I think he will have a great game this week. Michael Pittman, I would still play him. I would not play Pierce or Mitchell, though. Those guys are a little bit volume dependent and touchdown dependent for me. Same with these tight ends, Mo Alley Cox, Granson. They're very touchdown dependent, would not play them. Matt Gay, I think this is a good week for him. It's a dome. So if you've got, the Jake Bates or the Brandon McManus, they're playing in that inclement weather game, I think you can pivot to Matt Gay as a pretty good option. And then Will Reichert on the other side is another kicker that's been effective this season, but also lightly rostered. Not playing the Colts defense. Would you play Sam Darnold? Sam Darnold to me is in that mid-tier range of around 15. So as there was a question earlier, would you play Nix or Darnold? I would play Bo Nix. Would you play Darnold or Flacco? I would play Darnold over Joe Flacco. Aaron Jones, you play him. Ty Chandler, you roster him if you have Aaron Jones. So make sure that you have that set up for you if Aaron Jones is one of your top two running backs. Justin Jefferson, you play him. Jordan Addison, I don't love him. This is a good matchup, though, so I think it's an interesting stream, but I'd be looking at some other receivers like JSN in that last game. I'd play him over Jordan Addison if you got both of them. Hawkinson coming back from injury. I would not go there yet. I want to see how he looks post-injury. I would not really feel great about putting TJ Hawkinson in right away. And then the Minnesota Vikings defense, I think they're a good defense to play for this week. They are above those other streaming options that I've mentioned earlier. So if you have Minnesota, you've been sitting them the last few weeks because of matchups or a little bit disappointed with how they played, I would feel confident going back to them. All right, we've got 5 minutes left. So if you got any questions, fire away. I will use the last 5 minutes of this video, though, to talk about the Bucs and the Chiefs if I do not get any questions. If you do have any questions you want to ask, you're trying to make a last-minute decision, comment it, and I will get to it. All right, do you play Baker against the Chiefs? Again, another player that I don't love for this week. I think you can pivot to better options like Kirk Cousins, as I've mentioned multiple times, like Bo Nix, as I've mentioned. I think there's a lot of good options that you can turn to other than Baker, especially in this late game. I'd really be looking at other options. Rashad White, but I do love Baker rest of the season, though. I think he's locked in as a top 10 quarterback. I just think this is a tough matchup for him. Rashad White, I would play him. Bucky Irving, I would, if he's on the fringe, I would still play him because they're going to need to pass to somebody. I think that both these guys are going to have a good target volume and will be great plays, especially in PPR. I like McMillan to have a bounce back week for this week. I'm not expecting anything great, but I think that it's very realistic he gets 15 to 20 fantasy points this week. So again, we got the last 5 minutes for the game. So comment any questions you got below, and I will get to that right away. Cade Otton. I would definitely play him for this week. He is among those tight ends that are in that tier of high volume. I think he's going to be a great sleeper rest of the season, especially depending on what happens with Mike Evans and if they don't trade for other receivers. So Otten, you fire him away. Otten, I would play over guys like Dalton Kincaid. I would play him over guys like Ferguson, Yoseki, guys that I've mentioned earlier. I would play him over, the Cole Kmets. I think, to me, Otten is a top 10 tight end with top 5 upside. Chase McLaughlin this week. This game is supposed to have some rain as well, so I don't love McLaughlin for that, but I think he's a good pivot option to go to because just off the formula that, they've got some receiving deficiencies now, they may settle for a lot of field goals. I would sit the Bucs defense. Pat Mahomes. I've talked a lot about this guy, and I really do not think that he is a reliable fantasy player. I would sit him for this week. Kareem Hunt, I would play. I would not play any of the other Chiefs running backs. We've got 4 minutes before the game, so comment any questions you have, and I will get to it right away. DeAndre Hopkins, I would be looking to play for this week if you don't have a lot of great options. So among those guys I mentioned, like, the Legettes, the Quentin Johnstons, the Parker Washington, I would play Hopkins. You're just waiting it out until Monday night. Comment any questions. We got 3 minutes left before the game. Xavier Worthy, don't love this play, but I do think he is a solid option for you. And he's getting more involvement, so I think this is a great second half sleeper. Travis Kelce, I think he will have a good game today or on Monday. Harrison Butker, if you have him as your kicker, you're pretty much playing him every week. And then Kansas City Chiefs, this is a great defensive matchup, despite how they've played. And I just got an alert that Puka Nacua is a full go for week 9. So that's great if you own him. Fire him up right away, and that pretty much takes out any questions about any of the other receiving options like the Whittingtons, the Atwells, the Demarcus Robinsons, if you were in a situation where you're thinking of playing them. Now you definitely don't even need to roster them and just put Puka Nacua in your lineup. Chiefs defense has despite how the Buccaneers have been on offense, I would still play the Chiefs. All right, so we have 2 minutes left. I hope you guys have locked in your lineups by now, but if you haven't, comment any questions below and I will get to it right away. So in this video, if you want to go back and recap what we did today, we went through the fan questions. So first of all, if you watch my videos and you comment, I feature your questions in all my mailbag videos over the weekend before the game starts. And for those of you that have been watching for a while, let me know what you think of this live format. Do you like it better than what I was doing before? Do you want me to go back to doing this? Or do you want me to go back to what we did previous weeks where we just had, we had a video on Saturday that talked about all this stuff. So let me know what you like better, and we'll try this out and keep it rolling if you thought it was effective. Then we will go, after that, we talked about guys under 40% roster that you want to stash and you want to start. Then we talked about the guys that you want to put into your lineups among each individual game. So guys that you want to sit and you want to start. I went through all the games in depth. So you can watch that in my video if you want to rewatch what we just did. But for those of you that watched, just want to thank you for all your comments and for making this happen today. And as I said, let me know what you think of this. Do you want me to continue this moving forward on Sundays to do live like this, or do you want to have more of the Saturday video? But if you comment any questions you got, I feature it on my channel. I talk it in depth, so take advantage of that because I don't have a lot of subscribers. Trying to build the channel. So yeah, just fire any questions you got, and good luck in week 9. We'll see you guys next time. Hope you guys have a great week. Bye.